I'm going to describe and talk briefly about two teachers that have had a big influence on me or really helped me develop as a thinker. I actually transferred schools. I started off at Trinity College and ended up transferring to University of Pennsylvania. And I'm going to refer to one teacher that was at each of those two schools. So the teacher at Trinity that had a big influence on me was a sociology professor named Norman Miller. I did a tutorial with him. I had actually wanted to do a particular class with him, but I missed it, and he only taught it on every other year. And I stopped in on him one day, and I was trying to figure out if I could somehow get him to teach the course again. And I was about to leave the room, and he just said, "Well, why don't we just do it as a tutorial?" And maybe that's the kind of thing they do over in England a lot, the UK schools, but I hadn't experienced that before. I wasn't aware of it. And it ended up being a great class. And I think what was so special about the interaction is, number one, we had a very close human relationship and talked about various things, but probably what was most important is he pressed me to do two things. I would read a book every couple of weeks, and then I would write about it. But instead of simply writing about my responses to the book, he basically demanded, whatever word you want to use, that I begin every piece of writing by setting aside any judgment I had about the book, but simply describing what is the thesis, and to try to really define it and parse it as clearly as I could. And then after I did that, I could jump ahead and really get into the book and explain what I thought about it. But it was a very valuable exercise for me to force me to closely analyze what somebody else was saying before I formed an opinion about it. I could give some funny stories about him, but time is limited, so I'll skip it and just say that it was a great learning experience. And I think I really came into my own there. When I was in high school, I never thought of myself as particularly bright. It was only in college that I started to think of myself as smart. And I think that the experience I had with him was one of those experiences, because when I was pressed to do a particular type of writing that involved close reading and close analysis and then responding, I somehow discovered that I had certain talents that I just wasn't aware of. And in fact, I thought I just didn't have. The other teacher, after I transferred to University of Pennsylvania and started studying history there, was a professor named Marc Tractenberg, who I'm sure he doesn't remember me now, but I certainly remember him, and it was a formative experience. He taught a course on American foreign policy since World War II. It was basically a course on American Cold War foreign policy. And that course was structured largely around, similar to the previous tutorial that I had. This was an honors seminar where there were, 12 people in the class or the group, where we'd read a book and meet every 2 weeks, and we'd basically spend 2 weeks reading the book on our own, writing a detailed paper, handing in the paper, and then after the paper was handed in and we had already said what we thought of that book, Marc Tractenberg would then analyze the book for us. And what was especially impressive about that course was on the very first day, when we didn't really know what to expect from this seminar, Dr. Trachtenberg began we talked a little bit about the framework, how we're going to read a book every couple of weeks and we'll write something, and then after we've handed in what we've written, then he'll tell you and he'll pick the book apart. He wanted us to be thinking critically ourselves before he told us what he thought. But he ended off the very first class. He picked up a book that was quite well known at that time, and he read off all these glowing endorsements at the back of the book. This reviewer said this scholar said that. And then he kind of switched into this extremely very interesting way of speaking in a kind of high-pitched, very energized voice, and effectively said, after reading all these glowing reviews, this book is an absolute pile of crap, to put it bluntly. And it was sort of a shock, because I think at that stage we were all still kind of used to thinking that if a book is so heavily endorsed, it must be some great work of art and, come down from heavens like, manna or Ten Commandments or something. And it was really impressive to have him basically run such a strong counter argument against the book. He didn't explain all of his thinking, but he just said, he read all the stuff, and then he said, this book is actually garbage. Now go home, read the book, and write a paper telling me why. So that put the pressure on us all to figure out why the book was garbage. But that set the tone for the whole course. Every 2 weeks we'd come in, hand in a paper, and then we'd discuss the book. And then he'd hand up another book, and he'd read off all these wonderful reviews and glowing endorsements by top scholars and top publications, and then he'd say, this book is garbage. Go home and tell me why. And it was a wonderful exercise in not only critically approaching a book, but in trying to train oneself not to be so heavily influenced by what other people in positions of authority or credibility are saying about something. So, Dr. Miller's no longer alive. Marc is out in California now, not at University of Pennsylvania where I was then. But they were both, profound influences on my education. And, if I could thank them, I would say thank you.